I mean, you could slap in a barrel of mercury, and there's nothing on your instrumentation that would tell you that mercury has come out of the stack. Absolutely nothing at all. And that applies to, similarly to the other heavy metals, except for one other measurement, which is opacity, which tells you essentially how dark the smoke is, and that would, if you had a lot of particulate coming out, it would show up there. The combustion efficiency is thought to be, which would be given to you by carbon monoxide levels, is only a crude measure of the dioxins and furans coming out of the stack. So some of the most toxic materials, the ones of most concern, are not really told. Nobody knows what's happening on a day-to-day basis. And of course I think that's a disaster when it's a company running, working for profit. The best you can hope for is every so often someone's going to come in and do another one of these tests. But what all those tests do is to tell you how much toxic metal came out on that particular day when the test was done, and how much furans and dioxins came out on that particular day. I think there is a better way of adequately monitoring these facilities, and that will be to monitor the environment. To monitor the soil for heavy metals, which would then give you a cumulative history of what has happened, not just for one day, but what happened over the previous year. And also the leaves of trees, which also pick up the toxics. They're cleaners. Trees are great in polluted areas because they do clean the pollutants, a lot of pollutants out of the air.
Is that why Almana died?
Possibly. But that may be not due to exotic toxics, but more to less exotic things like sulfur dioxide. Acid gases will kill off trees, and acid rain and stuff. But the other thing is pine needles. Pine needles have been shown to be extremely effective absorbers of dioxin in the air, and therefore extremely good monitors of dioxin in the air. So if you were to collect pine needles, they concentrate in the waxy layer, the cuticle of the pine needle. And therefore you can take the pine needle, you can strip off the waxy layer and shove it in a GC mass spec, and you get a quick, relatively cheap, nothing is cheap with dioxins, measurement of the dioxins that have accumulated over a year, and the pine needles don't drop off as frequently as those other leaves. So what I've advocated to citizens, if they do go ahead and put any of these facilities in, whether it's a trash incinerator, medical waste incinerator, or hazardous waste incinerator, the first thing you do is you've got to get soil samples, upwind and downwind at different distances. You don't have to measure them at that point, but you need samples at a particular time. And then these samples must be collected at intervals as the thing progresses. And then you want to get a contract which says if these levels go up, the facility is shut down. You got it.
The problem is if that's in an area where there's heavy petrochemical production going on already.
Yes, well, that's important to do it. That's why it's very important to have background levels. It's very unscientific, and that's, I think, another important thing, incidentally, about the way these things are. The industry will try to take the position, and they're often helped with the regulatory agencies, that they are scientific, they are rational, they are reasonable, they are objective. And citizens who complain are emotional, hysterical, overreacting, selfish because they're only concerned because it's their own backyard and they're not looking after the general welfare of technological society as a whole. And I say that is utter bullshit. They are not scientific. I'm serious, they are not scientific. If you look at their science, it sucks. They don't do the background studies. I don't know of any single incinerator where they went out and got baseline studies. That's fundamental science. You don't do anything without some kind of baseline data so that you've got some basis of comparison. Because if you don't do that, then, as you said, Larry, it's the finger pointing. Those heavy metals are not caused by Rollins. Those heavy metals are caused by Texaco, somebody down the road. basically what you find with industry, when science serves its purpose, they're very scientific. The moment that science doesn't serve their purpose, then science is thrown out. Yesterday, Greenpeace in Washington, D.C. announced that the fundamental studies, which was meant to prove that dioxin has never harmed human beings. The industry's position is that dioxin is very, very bad for animals, but fortunately it's not very bad for human beings. That's Dow Chemical and the rest of them. And which is an extraordinary position on the face of it, because when the substance is toxic for rats, mice, guinea pigs, dogs, horses, cows, fish, birds, chicken, and monkeys, particularly monkeys, it would be a blooming biochemical miracle if it wasn't extremely toxic for human beings too. It would be the most extraordinary chemical that's ever been studied. However, it turns out that the BASF studies and the Monsanto studies were both fraudulent, and hopefully Greenpeace made a good job yesterday of exposing that fact. What they did, what the companies did in both cases, in their study of the workers exposed to dioxin, was they mixed the workers from the study group with the workers in the control group. They just switched the guys around. So that if you do that, then there's no elevation over, quote, control. And that is pretty well documented. I was at Toronto in '89 when that was exposed by a German epidemiologist called Roland for the BASF study, and Kate Jenkins from the EPA released the other stuff. So hopefully that was good. So the problem with regulations, monitoring, and enforcement. Enforcement is another thing. Louisiana is scary because I happen to have a considerable respect for the Louisiana authorities. I think the Attorney General's office with Willie Fontenoy is probably one of the best examples of force vision in the country, and I'm particularly impressed with Paul Templey, head of your regulatory agency, and I'm very impressed with the way this DEQ works with citizens groups. You may have had to bash them over the head with a 4x4 to get there, but it's very impressive, and I know no other state which is doing that. It's very impressive. You should be pleased. But having said that, you've got one of the most monstrous operations in the country, marine shale, and despite all this authority of the state on your side, they can't shut the buggers down.
You got it.
So even when you've got absolute clear case of violations and everything else, these crooks with their slick lawyers, liars,
the last is the best.
yeah, they're able to get away with it. I think the fourth point, which I think probably also ties in with the Rowlands experience, if I'm not mistaken, is that the Science Advisory Board to the EPA has indicated that you may get far more emissions from fugitive emissions than from the stack. In other words, I think the estimates from one of the chlorinated solvents, it was about 13 times as much of this material was coming from leaking tanks waiting to be burnt than was actually produced out of the stack. And as far as commercial operations are concerned, you've got the dangers of fires, explosions, accidents, leakage, and burning prior to the burning. And the difference between hazardous waste incineration and solid waste incineration is the potential for catastrophe. We do have the potential for a Bhopal with a commercial hazardous waste incinerator, because when that thing goes, you're going to put a very large quantity of materials into the environment. Very toxic materials have been gathered in one space in the place in the country, and off they could go. And the other thing that scares me as a chemist, and you must feel this too, and I think this is a big distinction between the commercial operation and the on-site operation, is you know that chemicals react with one another. And what happens when one barrel of some gunge from Kentucky mixes with another barrel of gunge from California, and no one really knows what's in there, and these things go simultaneously into the same tank? I think it's only a matter of time before you get two chemicals which have a highly thermal heat-releasing reaction to get an explosion of some kind. There have been a number of explosions in these facilities. Well, the next issue is, so I'm going to let you talk, but I'm going a long time. The next issue is the disposal of toxic ash. and the handling of ash, and I think this is an issue I was just mentioning briefly before. This applies particularly to solid waste incinerators and medical waste incinerators. There's been such a public relations effort by these incinerator companies to prove to everybody that the ash is non-toxic, because they do not want to treat it as hazardous material. If they do, it's the end of the industry. To convert 3 tons of trash into 1 ton of hazardous waste doesn't make any sense economically. It just doesn't, and they know that. And so there's been this tremendous exercise to prove one way or another, semantically, legalistically, even scientifically, this ash is non-toxic, and it's absolute nonsense. Of course it's toxic. But anyway, they've tried. As a result, there's a lot of innocent human beings, poorly trained scientifically, who are going into these plants at minimum wage, believing this crap, and therefore not realizing that when the boss tells them to mix that stuff over there with that stuff over there with a shovel, that they are handling ash containing 12,000 parts per million of lead, several thousand parts per million of cadmium, and dioxins and furans, which are known to be synthesized on the fly ash in these things. And I have one interviewer from a worker in a plant in South Carolina, Hampton, South Carolina. I said, have you ever been exposed to the dust? Because I'd already seen photographs of workers standing in the containers mixing the fly ash in with the bottom ash before it went to the landfill. I said, have you ever been exposed to the dust? He says, yes. He says, particularly in the precipitator. I said, what do you mean in the precipitator? He says, in the electrostatic precipitator. I said, you went inside the electrostatic precipitator? Yes, went inside the electrostatic precipitator. We had to fix, to unclog it and fix an auger and so on. I said, well, what kind of protection did you have when you went inside the precipitator? He said, well, we had a mask. I said, well, what kind of mask? This is a mask. I said, what kind? I said, what was it made of? It was made of plastic. And then his wife said, was it like this, Clyde? And she hands him a painter's mask made of paper. This guy had been buried up to his neck in fly ash, wearing a paper's mask. And then I thought, well, is this guy giving me a lot of bull? So the next worker guy I spoke to, who hadn't heard this conversation, I said, Clyde told me a story about being put inside an electrostatic precipitator with just a paper mask on. He says, it's true. He says, I've been put inside with a paper mask. He says, we all have to. And as I say, these guys, they either believe their own rhetoric, but the outcome is that the workers, I think, are being unduly exposed to danger because of the PR operation and not because of the scientific operation. And the last issue I've dwelt on already, that's much of what I said then deals with the theory of incineration, and the other thing is the practice of incineration. I think there's a lot of crooked things going on. I think there's a lot of fabrication of manifests. I think there's a lot of overloading of these things. I think the other thing, which is not theory, and Rusty, I'm not sure what the Vulcan incinerator is like, but there's a thing called a dump stack on all incinerators. Most incinerators have dump stacks, and if you don't have a dump stack, you've got to have a pretty sophisticated system to avoid it. A dump stack simply allows the pollutants to go directly from the furnace into the environment without any of the air pollution control devices. And essentially you've got to have some device like that, because if there's a blockage in your cleaning devices, your air pollution control devices, then the whole furnace could explode. I mean, you can't produce thousands and thousands of cubic meters of gas and then stop it from coming out of the furnace. Something's going to blow. And so they have a dump stack. They have a system which a flap will go up and the gases will go out of the stack directly into the environment. During those periods in which the dump stack is operating, and I've seen a list like this from Rollins in Deer Park, Texas, which is another one I've been to, like this, of when the dump stack was operating. I mean, sometimes it's 20 minutes, sometimes it's 3 hours, sometimes 4 hours, and so on. And during that time, you can forget all this 99.99 nonsense. You're getting you know, whatever didn't get burnt in a couple of seconds going through that second furnace, with none of the benefits of particulate control. So any metals at that point, all the metals will go out. All the hydrochloric acid will go out. And the only thing that you're relying on then is combustion efficiency for the destruction of things like the hydrocarbons. So those are essentially my concerns, and I think the last thing I would say is I do think that there are better ways to go, that rather than being, I think there's an analogy here that I see very starkly. With trash incineration, I watched this country rush into building trash incinerators based upon a false dichotomy, based upon the notion that if we didn't have these trash incinerators, we would have to put up with these revolting piles of shit called landfills. If you didn't go for these very expensive, shiny new trash incinerators, essentially built by the nuclear power industry because they've got nothing else to build, then you would have to put your kids through school in a tunnel through waste. I mean, this would be building up everywhere, and that was it. I mean, whatever problems you felt there were with trash incinerators, you were always focused back into these awful landfills. And of course, what we've struggled for the last 5 years to do, and are winning on trash incineration, over 100 trash incinerators have been defeated in this country in the last 3 or 4 years, is to say that there was a third way, and that is to treat trash in a rational way, of source separation, reuse of objects, recycling of materials back to industry, recycling of organics back to composting, a special effort to get the toxics out up front, and then bury the non-toxic, non-biodegradable materials in landfills, and non-threatening, politically acceptable landfills. And we're winning that. We're winning that in the United States. We're certainly winning that in Canada. And if you look at this videotape, which we just shot in Germany, we're winning it in Europe too. There's a tremendous revolt against incineration. And I sense the same thing is happening here with hazardous waste. There is a third way. There's a third way, which is neither ocean dumping a deep well injection, salt mines or anything, and incineration. And the number one priority is waste prevention. And everybody now agrees with this, from right out on the stratosphere of Greenpeace, right the way through to the knee-deep in bureaucracy of the OTA. Everybody agrees that the number one priority is waste prevention. And the OTA a few years ago said that 50% of the hazardous waste produced in this country is avoidable and could be done with off-the-shelf technologies. The really good news with that stance, the good news for industry, is that if you do it, if you prevent the making of waste, you save money. And the classic case, which is always used, is this 3M Corporation, which put into process 1,900 projects and saved the company $292 million doing it. That's a statement from the CEO of the company. You might want to read that. So that underlines the fact that a lot of waste is sloppy. A lot of waste produced in industry is sloppy. It's bad management, it's bad planning, it's lack of creativity where it's necessary. Waste is the visible face of inefficiency. If you do it, if you stop making that waste, you can get better processes. The second thing is waste exchange, where one company's waste can become another company's starting material. Often, believe it or not, hazardous waste is simply generated by a chemical company because it changes its line of doing business. Or a manufacturing company stops making this particular product, goes on to another product. So the chemicals that it was using in the first product suddenly become waste. They don't want to use it anymore. Well, I'm not sure how often that happens, but it's absolutely insane to send these good chemicals to a hazardous waste incinerator. Instead, there should be computerized databases exchanged with all companies knowing what other companies are putting out. And sometimes it's a question of specifications. You know, so what would be usable by one company would not be usable by another because of the specifications.
Aren't some industries beginning to do that?
Oh yes, this is happening.
They're not doing it down here, I know, but
Yeah.
they are doing it in the United States. Are they not? People look at me like I'm crazy when I say there's such a thing.
Yeah.
Well,
I would
there's
tell
some
you,
of it going on here.
I'm more hopeful at this stage with the industry doing things than I am with the EPA and the others. I think the industry sees the bottom line here. I think we are going to see a lot of movement by the more progressive companies to really get into waste prevention in a very big way. It saves them money and it's tremendously good for PR. So waste exchange, it's not technology you're talking about. It's people getting off their fanny in the regulatory agencies and organizing information and getting, going to companies and getting them to cooperate. The third thing, of course, is the one we all know, and that's waste recycling. Recycling. This is particularly true of solvents. When you use a solvent, you do not change the solvent chemically. The solvent remains essentially the solvent, and you just made it dirty, so it cries out for filtration or distillation to reclaim that solvent. And the extraordinary thing is that a large proportion of the hazardous waste that is currently being burnt in commercial hazardous waste incinerators are spent solvents. Industry uses a hell of a lot of trichloroethylene, and that's ending up in hazardous waste incinerators. If you're going to make trichloroethylene, then for goodness sake, keep it recycled for as long as possible. The fourth point, there's not much disagreement, by the way, in that hierarchy. Number one, waste reduction. Number two, waste exchange. Number three, waste recycling. Most of the government agencies would agree with that hierarchy. But so much of it is rhetoric and not action. Number four is where we depart, because I'm going to throw in my own thing at this point. Number four, in many places now, would be incineration. Many government agencies would then, after, if you've exhausted one, two, three, go to incineration. I put in, my number four is chemical and biological treatment. I particularly want to make sure that nothing containing metals is burnt. So the top priority with this stuff that you cannot reduce, cannot exchange, cannot recycle, number one thing is now to get the metals out of that. Whatever the process is, get the metals out, because it's going to do you no damn good to put it into an incinerator. And number two, get the chlorine out. And there are now commercially available operations which dechlorinate substances. And there are at least 4 different chemical processes which remove chlorine from chlorinated organics. They are often expensive, but nowhere near the capital costs of incineration. The chemicals cost money. And I think when you're looking at these chemical and biological treatment methods, I think what you're looking at here is we have to shift the chemistry, the chemical, the creative chemists from making all of them being used to make new substances. We've got to shift some of that expertise and creativity and imagination to the task of dismantling the old substances. By and large, the money is made in industry by making new substances and doing that. And we've got to persuade more industries to get into the back end of these things. After that, in my scenario, I have incineration for mixtures containing no metals or chlorinated organics on site. I believe that the chemical companies, like Vulcan, like the others, know more about those chemicals than anybody else, number one. They have experience of handling those chemicals, number two. They have the best analytical ability, and they have a tremendous stake, I think, in doing a good job, and I think that's what we heard from Rusty today. So, and I'd rather see the chemical. I think the sloppiest things happen when someone pays money to get rid of a problem on somebody else. That's when you can expect the really sloppiest things happening, and these people live near the result. And number 6, I have above ground containment with generators retaining ownership and liability for that material. In other words, you have concrete buildings with well-ventilated, activated charcoal filters with containers of this material sitting there, a constant reminder that we've done something stupid. Really, I'm really conscious. Just like household toxics should be brought out, the regulatory agencies are allowing these things to go into landfills with the myth that plastic liners will protect us. Or they allow them to go into incinerators with the myth that air pollution control devices will protect us. And I'm saying no, make the damn stuff visible. Because if the only thing that you can do with this thing, stuff at the end, is to put it into a landfill or put it into an incinerator, we shouldn't have made it in the first place. And as far as the last thing I would say is that as far as our needing, we can't go back to the horse and buggy. I guess part of me would like to go back to the horse and buggy, but that is not, I wouldn't try to persuade everybody else to go back to the horse and buggy. But I do believe that society is tolerating a lot of this abuse not only of the people that live near chemical plants, but the people who live near incinerators for very trivial reasons, very flippant reasons. I do not believe that we need disposable razors. I do not think that we need disposable diapers made of plastic. I don't think we need a million of the products that we have been persuaded by slick Madison Avenue devices that we think that we need. We are essentially being sold a bunch of plastic shit because our lives are so vacuous, we got so empty because we spend so many hours sitting in front of that moronic television set, and every 7 minutes the price that we pay for dying on the settee whilst other people live on the other side of the plastic screen is that we are made to feel hungry, thirsty, or frustrated, so we have to go out and eat something, drink something, or screw somebody. It's Madison Avenue that is making us want a lot of other stuff, and I do believe if people begin to appreciate the full dangers of the disposal of some of this substance, and they are told, do you know that one of the prices that you have of using a styrofoam coffee cup as opposed to a china cup, okay, is that some human beings have to live near a plant that manufactures styrene, and they have to have the consequences. And did you know that? I think there will be a move to get rid of some of these flippant things, and I think McDonald's is a good example of where that's happened. I've taken up a lot of
Let me
things.
get you some coffee too.
Yes,
What
please.
you like?
Not in styrofoam. As long as it's not in
We have no
styrofoam.
I want you to know we organized the boycott of polystyrene foam. Susan, all the lean folks, all our groups, and we actually got 2 businesses here at the Fast Track burger place that has some in Louisiana and Florida to sign a good neighbor agreement and phase out the use of polystyrene foam.
That's
Right?
right.
Southern University, which is where Florence teaches biology, signed
Right.
a good neighbor agreement. Burger
Caffeine,
Time.
please.
We don't want any
Nothing-
decaffeinated coffee that
What-
might have been
what-
treated with
No,
chlorinated
no,
salt.
That's right. That's right.
This is the leaded stuff, not the unleaded.
One question I have about the on-site incineration, it's things I've heard is that people are saying, well, if it's on-site, it's not going to be so easily regulated. It'd be the story of the fox guarding the.
That's not true.
I just wanted to.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Far from the truth.
You know, I think that's, I'd rather tackle the on-site incinerators than I would have these any more commercial hazardous waste incinerators.
They have to keep the same records with the pollution control equipment, the waste feeds going in. I know I worked on the Vulcan trial burn, and there was a lot of problems with it, and once we were able to show those problems, the company agreed that there was problems. It was not necessarily the company's fault. It was the contractor and the lab that had caused those problems. And as long as they can prove with the trial burn that everything's running right, I would much rather see that incinerator working out there. I don't want to see anybody lose their jobs. And the company was telling the workers that, well, this environmental group's against our incinerator, we're going to lose it. Y'all are going to lose your jobs. Well, that's not true. We don't want that incinerator shut down. Because I know, I would much rather see that waste go from that unit to that incinerator than see it route through a community sent to a commercial facility.
Plus, too, commercial hazardous waste facilities do not have to file toxic release inventory reports.
And the local companies do.
Mhm.
And that's real important.
Well, why don't we let Rusty, I think, respond to some of the, I just seem to have had it used a lot of the
God,
time.
where do I start on yours? First of all, I want to clear up something. I want everybody to understand that I'm OCAW, and I'm environmentally concerned. And I'm also a member of some outside organizations that has also worked in some environmentally concerned movements in this state. Marine shale has also, we've done a lot of work down there protesting marine shale also. So I want everybody to understand my position is not company. my position is what's safest, what's the best for us. A lot of things that Dr. Connet said were very specific, well-defined. They were straight to the point. But a lot of statements he made were generalized. Sure, it's wonderful to say, yeah, we need to recycle, we need to, you know, get back to the horse and buggy days. If we were living in the horse and buggy days right now, I would have been dead 3 times already. But because of medical technology, I'm alive today. And that's what keeps popping into my head. The people in the horse and buggy days live to be 35, 40 years old max. We live to be 70, 75. Yeah, we die of cancer at 75. So where do we go? It is a catch-22, and it's scary. Has any ladies in here never used, that had children, never used a plastic diaper?
Me.
You never have used a
Never
plastic
used
diaper?
I have 2 children, I use cloth diapers, washed them, it was no big deal.
And my
That's
children
wonderful.
were born at home.
That's where it starts. It does start. It's a grassroots movement. It starts in the home. How many ladies in here don't dump Clorox bleach and other solvents in their house down their drain? Okay, you don't use any kind of solvents to clean your bathtub or toilets or anything like that. And you pull them out of the toilet. Okay, so you flush them to the system. Okay, so this is what we're dealing with. It's a grassroots thing. It starts in the home. It starts every time you pull a polyester blanket up to your chin on a cold night. It starts every time you use plastic products, VCR tapes. Nobody in here is going to tell me they don't use VCR tapes. Right here. You know, so it's all around us. What do we do? And his analogy of the on-site compared to the commercial, I agree wholeheartedly. And I agree with what this lady said here about the problems of on-site compared to commercial. The operators of Vulcan Chemicals, and that's who I'm representing. I'm representing the operators of Vulcan Chemicals. They're OCAW, they're organized labor. They care about the environment. They work with the DEQ. They work with Lean, as you can see right now. They work with environmental groups. Greenpeace has been very active in the OCAW movement in this country. And we're very proud of that movement. And that's who I'm here representing now, the dedication of operators out there at Vulcan who are union. I have talked to Paul Tomplay myself and told him any records he needs from Vulcan Chemicals, I will acquire them for him. We're very open. Now, this isn't the company speaking, and if I got caught, I'd probably be bye-bye. But that's the way I feel about it. That's the way I feel about it. This is my home. This is Louisiana. It's my home, and my family lives here, and I don't want to breathe it, and I don't want anybody else to breathe it. So, as a member of OCAW, I'm very concerned, and that's why I'm here, and that's why I feel so strongly about hazardous waste incinerators. It's based on the 2 John Zink incinerators we have on site. One of them is a gas incinerator. It incinerates vent gases off reactors and storage tanks. The other is a liquid stream incinerator. I feel like they're very safe. It's the wet scrubbing system that Dr. Connet was talking about with alkalinity scrubbers involved in it. I think it's a good process. I know there's always room for improvement, always. And we do have to put stress on these companies to improve. We do have to put stress on people, the common person out there to start recycling, to start eliminating waste. Vulcan uses all 3 of those that you mentioned, elimination, exchange, and prevention. Vulcan's very active in that. But Vulcan wasn't active in that until the DEQ started putting pressure on them. I'm not going to lie to you. Now they spent $80 million in the last few years just on environmental concerns. No return on their money whatsoever. But they didn't drop a dime until the DEQ and the people started hollering.
But you know, I feel like industries have to give people alternatives. Because if you're going to have styrofoam and paper cups out there, and the styrofoam's cheaper, people aren't going to buy paper cups because they're good environmental citizens. They're not going to do that. So I think, you know, too much focus is often put on the individual to make the changes, and I don't think that's quite the way to go.
Well, is it?
I think it's there's a connection there.
As long as there's demand, there's going to be somebody around to sell it. And I mean, that's a big problem with the
Well-
war on cocaine right now. As long as the people in the United States keep demanding it, there's going to be somebody out there that will make a buck off selling it.
Well, I don't know, do you think people demand throwaway razors? I mean, is that,
Yeah, they do. Of course they do.
You think
You
that-
know why? Because we're lazy.
I think that's
We're a
a big
disposable
thing.
world.
No, it's because, we're sold
but
these
so,
things.
this is
There-
it.
There's, what we're looking at here is, and I think we're gonna win, incidentally, I mean, what we're looking at here is a coalition of forces getting together to try to battle Madison Avenue. I mean, that's what we're up against. We're up against a $70 billion industry which sells whatever the chemical industry wants to make. That's what we're up against, and obviously the dice is loaded against us. We don't have $70 billion to spend on advertising, but my God, we've got more creativity and imagination in our little fingers than some of those people at Madison Avenue, so we'll get them. But, you know, where we can get enlightened people at the other end of these things, also making decisions and taking the vision, because it is our same planet. I mean, we're all on the same planet. Their kids are gonna be deprived of resources. Their kids are gonna have these dumps to live with. It's you've got pollutants in your body from all over the world.
I got last measure 60 parts per billion hexchlorobenzene, butadiene, and ethane in my body.
But I mean, we're all gonna be eating the same food.
Of course, but the reason I have it in my body is because I make real good money, because there's plenty of people out there that want the things that these chemicals make. And so as long as the demand is there, there'll be corporations making them. As long as there's corporations making them, there'll be people like me who have no formal college education, who have various football injuries, which prevents me from doing manual labor, but I can go get a good job at making real good money, producing things that people demand. As long as the demand's there, it's going to be there. And what we have to do, and what y'all are doing right now with your publicity campaigns, is getting to the consumer, getting to the person who makes these demands. And I see this at work all the time. I see people not using styrofoam cups at work now. I see guys recycling cans, recycling white paper at work on their own. They're not making any money out of it. They're doing it on their own, and it's happening. You're getting, you're getting to the grassroots. You're starting to do it now, and that's where it has to be. Industry is not going to come up and kiss your butt for anything unless they're going to make a dollar off of it. Now, they're not going to say, well, let's think up a safer way to do this. But if people start saying, hey, in the demands they make, they demand a safer way of production, it's going to happen. And that happens with the voting citizen in this country.
But there's got to be more communication too. One, we're very proud, Rusty, that we have 3 unions that are members of WEAN, and we work really strong for workers' health and safety, and have had some industries make changes in their procedures within a facility. Gerald Tillman would be here today, except who's a worker who's on the board, except he has pneumonia again. I think he is beginning to have what, in my environmental law class, I'm no attorney, but they're beginning to call chemical AIDS among your workers, and chemical AIDS among these community people, which means your immune system is breaking down due to what you're telling me is stored in your body. I mean, that's incredible that you could make that statement without your facial expression changing.
Well,
I mean, I'm outraged that you
It's been 10
workers are
years since I
supposed to.
first found out about it, so it's something I've been living with.
Well,
So it's,
I have
you
to.
should have seen the first time I found out about it.
I have to apologize. I mean, you know, as director, I get to, know a good bit about some things and a whole hell of a lot I don't know about, and I'm not as familiar with Vulcan. I mean, Ramona has been handling, but what kind of safety procedures are you, is your company doing for you, or are you demanding as a worker, if you're unionized? For instance, there's a 34-year-old worker yesterday, right now, that's dying of congestive heart failure, because he was exposed at the facility where he lives. And he's 34 years old, and he turned to his wife and he said, I'm just simply wearing out. I mean, the chemicals have gotten to the degree that they affect his heart. He needs a heart transplant. 34 years old. This guy's not 75-year-old, Rusty. 34 years old. I mean, you're a big, strapping young man, but I've seen workers who are not, in a very short period of time after exposure, are no longer
Oh, well, don't
like
get me
that.
wrong. I'm not proud of the 60 parts per billion of hexes in my blood. I'm not proud of the fact that back in the late 70s, when I started out at Vulcan at 19 years old, we would work on flanges and have liquid vinyl chloride running down our arms and evaporating underneath the armpits. I'm not proud of that. But
what are you
what
doing?
I
Can
what
we
I
help you
have
make that
seen
better? What are you
since
doing
then,
to protect
what
yourself?
what I've seen since then is controls mainly because of pressure from OCAW and OSHA, is controls of when there is 1 part per million monitored out in your unit to where self-contained breathing apparatus, fresh air. We've gone from wearing little disposable vinyl chloride masks at 10 parts per million to wearing fresh air scuba gear basically for 1 part per million. The controls are there. I mean, they're just getting more stringent all the time. At the last contract that I was involved in negotiating with Vulcan was the very last contract OCAW had with Vulcan 3 years ago. We negotiated into the contract that regular hex monitoring of the blood will take place at the company's expense, and there will be regular meetings between the negotiating committee and the management of Vulcan at regular meetings at either the union's calling or the company's calling to meet and discuss these numbers and these analysis. And more I'm seeing health and safety being forced into the contracts that we're signing with them. It's not money and benefits anymore. It's health. And the operators out there, we know what this stuff does to us. I mean, we're selling our body for $17 an hour, and that's all it is. I mean, let's face it, let's get down to brass tacks. We're selling our body for $17 an hour. We know it. We're not ashamed of it because we got to earn a living. We got families. But at the same time, being involved in this industry and knowing the ill effects of the industry and knowing what happens when you get vinyl chloride all over your body, when you breathe all these different kinds of hexes, when you breathe chlorine, when you're chlorinated, when you're dropped to your knees by methyl chloride gas, all of which has happened to me. Being exposed to this, I know what we can do to eradicate this from happening again or eliminate this from our future of the workers out at Vulcan Chemicals through contract negotiations. I just can't stress that enough. Unionism is very important in the environmental movement and the safety movement.
Rusty, so you have made this commitment, and you obviously an officer in the union?
I have been.
Okay.
I'm up for election
So
this year.
you feel that the workers, which we feel, the workers are impacted first before our community people.
Of course they
They're
are.
so incredibly
Of course they
important.
are.
You're like these throwaways sometimes, these contract workers, they don't count on safety.
Of course they
workers
are.
and
But
all
you know,
that.
a lot of time.
But so you feel like you're able to you're bargaining better to get better safety procedures?
Oh, we do. Every contract, it just gets better safety procedures. And what people have to realize, and Lean has to realize, Dr. Connet has to realize, is that union workers inside chemical plants is your watchdogs. And there's not that many unions left on the river.
And the only way you're going to get watchdogs who are going to be able to bark is to have union workers.
Yeah.
You
You can't, the other plants in Cancer Alley, there's only 2 that are unionized.
BASF and Vulcan, the only 2 that are, it's the only.
You got 14 plants out there. The other 12 need to be unionized, and if the environmental movement wants to strengthen its connection to eradicating these problems, help us unionize.
But here we get into it.
Do you feel the same way?
Oh, absolutely. What I just heard, I think it's very.
We get into another catch-22 here, though, because I'm not saying that there's people in this room that have made the statement on. There might have been people in this room that made the statement that's anti-union. The big movement in this country now is anti-union, and it may very well be pushed by Madison Avenue or big corporations, but it's anti-union. You hear Rush Limbaugh talking anti-union. All your conservative talk show hosts are anti-union, and that's scary. That's real scary, because all the benefits we have in the workplace, health care and vacation and retirement, all the benefits that your lunch hour is here because of union, is here because of organized labor. And once those unions are gone, your watchdogs on your health and safety are going to be gone, and you can watch your benefits dwindle too, because it gets down to the mighty dollar.
To reinforce that story, Rollins had the 2 workers that were so severely injured, and I went to visit them, and one was 35 years old and his heart had stopped, and the other was 25 years old and couldn't walk without incredible chest pains. And the 35-year-old who had 2 kids was saying, this wouldn't have happened to me if I'd have been a member of the union still. He said, I was introduced into, to doing this job. I'm a painter. I never thought I'd be exposed to these chemicals. How could this happen to me? But I was given no instructions what to do if there was a problem. no real, outlays what to do during the plan. I mean, these are folks who are disabled for life, and they are contract workers, they're disposable, they're not on their own safety record. I think we need to talk about that at the press conference, it makes me so upset. But so, yeah, I do agree. I mean, if these people were union workers, they wouldn't have.
There's a lot of people out there that are saying the times of the unions past. Unions passe. There may be somebody in here that has a small business, and the workers have tried to unionize, or the workers have talked about unionizing, and made a statement, well, man, unions, they just want to mess up there. They just want $10 to sit on their butt. They don't want to get paid what they're worth. Blah blah. You can hear 1,000 arguments every day on unions. But one thing about it is OCAW's in this meeting with you right now. And OCAW's worked with Greenpeace and Lean and SOS and Sierra Club. And that's your unions. That's what your unions are doing for you right now. We taking care of our workers with...
It protects freedom of speech.
Yes, and it protects a lot of things. And Lean would like to stress, we are all for the unions.
The LA Watch number will know it. Give him that number.
I don't know if you know who I am, I'm Daryl's wife.
Okay,
Darryl Stevens' wife.
yeah, I know Daryl.
And if it wasn't for OCAW, one, we wouldn't be in the work that we're in now. But two, I've watched him work in chemical plants for 10 years. The only time that he was in a good, true union was OCAW. The 2 years he worked at BASF and 5.5 years he was locked out. The only way that the workers have the right to say no to unsafe work is the union. Contract workers have no rights. If you say no to an unsafe job and you're a contract worker, you're out the gate. No questions asked. I've always pushed for chemical plants to be unionized because it's a safer workplace and a safer community. It upsets me greatly that there's only 2 plants in Geismar and St. Gabriel that are true union.
Rusty and I are going to be putting out a newsletter that's going to contain a lot of environmental information. You can bet that newsletter is going to be banned in the non-union plants.
Oh yes, they don't want people to be educated on the environment in the non-union.
I put out my own newsletter at Vulcan for a little over a year, and regularly I had reports to various supervisors of 20, 25 copies going to the main offices in Birmingham and everything. It upset them because it's freedom of speech. It's the voice of the worker there, and the union does promote that. So what we have to do, we have to promote, as I said, on the grassroots level, we have to get down to people, tell them to recycle their paper and their cans. We have to tell them not to buy styrene. We have to tell them to try to find ways to cut down on production of hazardous waste because it starts in the home. We have to support our unions because they're our watchdog in the chemical industry. They're the people who are going to be involved. They're not concerned about the buck. We're concerned about our working conditions. We're concerned about our pay and benefits, yes, but we're not concerned about the almighty dollar over our community's health and our environment.
You don't want to spend all your money in the doctor's office.
Exactly, and I for one am one who's regularly had pneumonia, so I may be suffering from the industrial age you were talking about.
After you retire,
but,
the average lifespan.
Of course, but well, after 8 years of football, I'm not in too good a shape anyway. But anyway, let's.
What can you say to all this?
I just.
Expert here.
Well, I'm so glad this has happened. I'm so glad that Larry and Bishop before him have worked hard on getting this coalition between environmental interests and the union interests. The two things go hand in hand. It's exciting. I'm surprised it's only 2 out of 14.
That's great.
It's incredible. But I just wanted to throw in something else because I think there's something I saw in Germany which I did not expect to see, which is happening in a very big way. Let me just tell you about it, if I may. This is a little digression from the issue of hazardous waste incineration. I went over to my sixth International Symposium on Dioxin in Bayreuth. The first thing that I noticed was there were 900 people there. Normally we get about 500 people on these annual symposia on dioxin. Something was happening. What we found out was that the Germans have put on a much more stringent dioxin standard on their trash incinerators. Obviously that got a lot of engineers to go. We already knew that the dioxin was being found in cow's milk downwind of trash incinerators in Holland, and that was a serious issue. But the other thing that we found out is that doctors are telling patients, telling women in Germany not to breastfeed their kids for more than 3 or 4 months, because right now listen to these numbers, are incredible. The allowable daily intake in Germany for dioxins is 1 picogram, that's a trillionth of a gram, per kilogram body weight per day. Breastfed infants are getting 100 picograms per kilogram per day. And so they are sensitive. What pediatricians are saying is, look, we know that breastfeeding confers immunities. Those are known benefits. We do not know what the risks are of getting, because there are safety margins and everything. There's all kinds of things which means you don't know what the ramifications of this are going to be. So to play safe, let's breastfeed for a shorter amount of time to give those as many of those benefits as you can in those first 3 or 4 months of breastfeeding, and then stop so that we don't give too much dioxin to these growing human beings. Now, that has put a hand grenade into the psyche in Germany. It's just unbelievable. We have 13,000 doctors now in the Munich area opposed to incineration. They got a referendum on the ballot for the first time in 17 years. Bavaria has a way of getting a referendum, making a public law referendum. The reason it hasn't happened for 17 years, it takes 10% of the Bavarian population to go to their town halls in a 2-week period to sign this call for a referendum in front of a witness. And they just can't just sign it on a petition if someone comes to your house. So they had to get 850,000 people to go to their town halls between June the 16th and June the 28th, 1990. 850. You know how many people they got? 1,060,000. 1,060,000 people went to the town halls to call for this referendum, which would prevent any more incinerators being built, trash incinerators, and would phase out the existing incinerators. In Bavaria, which has built 17 incinerators over the last 20 years and wanted to build another 15, it is the home of incinerators. Well, it's got to be voted on now in February. February the 21st could be the biggest day. Could be the biggest day.
I want to know what happened.
But I think what I'm sensed is happening here is we've known about this dioxins in breast milk since 1986. I remember seeing a letter from Christopher Rapp from Sweden about this. At the time, I reacted. I thought, oh my God, this is going to kill incineration. But it didn't go very far in official circles. The World Health Organization kept on talking about it, but would pull its punches. Basically, because nobody wanted to grab the hot potato of saying to women, don't breastfeed your kids. And one doctor that I interviewed in Germany said, and I've got this on videotape, dynamite, she discussed the two sides. Some people say breastfeed all you can. Other doctors say limit the breastfeeding. She says, what I say is that when you tell a woman that she shouldn't breastfeed her child, it's the beginning of the end of mankind. Of the end of mankind. And you think about that. People talk about being radical. I can't think of anything more radical than telling a woman that she should limit her breastfeeding. That's about as basic a human act that you can have, and yet you're going to limit that now. That makes little things like banning polyvinyl chloride off the face of the earth seem pretty trivial. And I'm just saying that because I think what I've seen in Germany, I think you're going to see it repeated in country after country. When people begin to really grapple with this issue. These substances are fat-soluble, they're highly persistent, that means they build up in the food chains. We are at the top of the food chains. We store these fat-soluble toxics in our fat, and the woman has a way of getting rid of these fat-soluble toxics. It's called breastfeeding. And so it's the baby that gets the highest dose of these persistent toxics, and they come from all over the planet. So you talk about global pollution. Global pollution is zeroing right down to our babies. So on the one hand, I see what's going on in industry is at one end of the spectrum. What you're doing, Rusty, is so important. What Larry's doing is so important. What Lena's doing is so important. To bring these two together, it's important at that end. But I want to tell you that at the other end of this thing, you're going to see an enormous demand for radical action at the other end of the spectrum. That the people, when they start hearing about this limiting breastfeeding and so on, they're going to make demands on industry like industry's never seen before. Really, and
All right.
right,
That's what we need. But you know, with a lot of people who are uninformed, misinformed, they don't go to these meetings like this. They're not privy to the technological information that we are. And they read an article in a paper, or they hear from somebody, hey man, they're building an incinerator in such and such a place, and we're gonna stop it.
yeah.
That is so naive to take that attitude. The attitude should be, hey, they're building a hazardous waste incinerator in a place. They haven't done any kind of biological or geological studies in the area. They have no idea what the output of that incinerator is going to do to that environment. Let's stop it. As opposed to, hey man, there's this company and they've come up with a way to incinerate a certain kind of hazardous waste. It's safe, it's efficient. They've done their geological and biological studies of the area, studying the grass and the soils, as Dr. Connet mentioned. These people are really trying to do a good, safe job. Let's support them. You're not going to have that. And that's what we need. We need to, if we find somebody that is going through all the painstaking labor to make sure that when they build an incinerator, it's done environmentally correct. It's done with regard to the community and the environment. And support those people because they're doing it right. If you just keep slapping the hand of everybody that puts up an incinerator, people's going to stop hearing you. Your words are going to fall on deaf ears. Going to say, well, those radical left-wing groups, you know, the end.
Do you know of any such company that is doing these kinds of things? Going in and doing the environmental studies, getting the baseline data?
I do.
And that has a record of operating a safe incinerator that follows guidelines, that does not have emissions? Do you know of any such company?
Yes, I do.
Who?
The company that I work for with union technicians. We have our records, and like as I stated earlier, a lot of the environmental controls we have now are due to pressure from DEQ. But there's a lot of things we handle with our incinerator as far as our records goes, as far as our on-site analysis, as far as the efficiency of our incinerator, that me as an OCAW member and former officer and concerned citizen that I'm very proud of. But I don't hear anybody coming up and applauding if a company finds a process or procedure that may help the environment. I don't ever hear about environmentally concerned groups patting anybody on the back. It's always negative. It's always negative.
You know what might be a
What
good
about
move to
that because I hear that so much.
What about positive reinforcement?
That's
Well,
right.
this is what I did today with the 3M
Well,
Corporation.
Yeah, I think you thought that
You
was.
say yours is doing it now, and yet your body has already been assaulted with these chemicals.
And it will continue to be assaulted with the chemicals as long as they're produced in this plant that I work at. I mean, the hexes are in the dust that float around the unit. As long as I work in that facility, I'll be getting those chemicals in my body, of course, because you, as a consumer, demand those chemicals.
No, because your company, through Madison Avenue, told me I really have to have them, and they keep putting them out.
Oh, and you have no mind of your own. And whatever Madison Avenue tells you to
I don't
do,
buy 'em.
you're gonna go do.
But your
You don't
ordinary
buy what?
public does. Your ordinary public does.
You don't
I
buy
don't
what?
buy a lot of those plastics and styrenes and things of that
Sure,
sort.
that's the worst ones right there.
Yeah.
But we buy polyester clothes. We have plastic frames on our glasses. We use makeup. We use medicine. We use milk in, maybe in plastic containers. We start our cars. We paint our houses. You know, plastics and styrenes, that's the bad words. Oh, plastics and styrenes. But it's in every facet of our everyday life.
Does your
And as long as
company
we
completely-
demand,
Does your company take all the measures that it should to protect the health of its workers?
Well, see, I think that's a question that needs to be addressed, along with this union question. See,
Yeah.
if you have union support, and one of the best things that could be done in in this press conference about Rollins today is to let Rusty or I take a moment just to say, you know, to contrast Rollins with Vulcan Incinerator.
Sure.
Challenge Rollins. You
Challenge.
should set up a union.
To
The point that I
and to
would-
make the
I would
point
make
that you
is
need to watch those
You
inside.
have a right, Rusty, to earn a living. Yes, you do. You have a right to earn a living. You mentioned that you don't have a college education. Well, there's lots of people who work in these plants who've got far less education, not to mention understanding, than you have. Not to mention gumption and backbone to fight and say, I need this. But don't think that the people who, number one, created these companies and who run these companies and who are in the upper echelons of these companies, don't think that they don't have college educations. They're not just college people, they're chemists, they're trained in this. They know what they're dealing with, they know what its effects are, they know what it's doing to you and all those other people who come into that company. They know what happens when their dump stack is going out and people in the community being affected. They know about this stuff, but what do? They sit back, they will not protect you or the other workers. They could give less about the community people as long as they can make that big buck. And they keep pushing it on the TV to make sure that a lot of Americans, I hate to say it, but we're like sheep. You tell us we need it, we say, yeah, I need it, I gotta go get it. We don't think for ourselves.
I agree with you.
All that is exploitation. It's exploitation by a few of the masses.
I agree with you, and the difference in me and your average worker that I assume you're comparing me to is that I have a union that is looking out for my benefit.
Why do you still have a union? What has happened to the unions?
What has happened to me?
Used to be unions everywhere. What has happened to the
Oh, yeah,
unions?
they
We've been
did.
under
There's
constant
been a
attack.
campaign against
Absolutely.
unions.
Absolutely.
It's the same
how many-
people
how
who are
many-
pushing the chemicals that have campaigned against them.
Absolutely, I have no quarrel with
It's
that
all
at all.
continuum.
But my position is, what is the people out there doing for the unions? I mean, when's the last time you made a statement that was pro-union, said, man, we need unions, you know, not just you, the common,
Everyday person.
John
Because the
Q.
common
Public.
everyday person is the husband who
he's-
works in the plant, who's scared not to go to work, even though he got injured on the job because of equipment that was faulty, and he still goes to work. He doesn't even go to the nurse because he doesn't want it to be reported that it was an accident, so they can keep saying,
ma'am,
our
I see
company's
that in my
here for an
plant
accident.
with contract labor. I see that in my plant. Contract maintenance, they're non-union in my plant. And
Yeah.
I've seen guys get their thigh muscles ripped and leave the plant without reporting to the nurse, to go to the hospital, get stitched up, and come back and limp around the next day. I've seen this happen. I've seen it for 12 years, and I agree with you totally. And I'm not sitting up here saying Vulcan Chemicals is the shining oasis in this desert. It's not by any means. But my point originally was, in as much as the environmentally concerned groups can put negative pressure on an organization such as BASF when they locked out union people and started dumping crap into our environment, as much as we can put negative pressure on that, when a company does something, say on its own, an initiative it takes on its own, let's applaud it at the same time. Because positive reinforcement is just as important as negative pressure. And I think that's something we do have to look at. And yes, we're exploited by Madison Avenue, but we're human beings, and we have minds of our own. God gave us a mind to think, and just as you say you don't use styrofoam cups, you're using your mind. Madison Avenue can come on TV for every day for the next month and tell you buy these styrene cups, but you're not going to buy them because you're using your mind. And that's what we have to get into the general citizens and the general public's mind, is to exercise their intelligence, exercise their God-given right of being able to choose between good and bad.
Russ, let me ask you this. Would you want your son to be exposed to what you have, that you've been exposed to? And you're talking about even, I mean, you're in a place where the incineration is already in place, the incinerator is already in place.
Mhm.
But could you, in good conscience, want an incinerator being built someplace else, and another worker and their family to go through what you and the workers are exposed to where you are?
What me and the workers where I'm at are going to is a result of, as Dr. Connet said, inefficient scientific technology, analytical studies, but it's getting better all the time. If there's an incinerator that's built and does the biological and geological studies that Dr. Connet stressed so avidly in his commentary, and it's proven safe, and it's proven that the company, it does care about its workers with the union, involved in the union or whatever, I don't have a problem with that. What I got a problem with is my son being exploited, as this lady said, by a company, and that's what I'm allowing myself to be exploited. In the same way that I was telling this lady, she has a mind, she has a right, and it has an intelligence to choose between right and wrong, so do I. And as far as my body goes, I'm not going to say I've chosen the right path. Absolutely not. I've put things into my body that will probably terminate me at a very early age. I know that. And I was exploited just as she feels she's exploited by Madison Avenue. But I can see future incinerators with the technology and the analytical studies. I can see future incinerators being a safe way, being a safe form of incineration. And I can see my son, if he doesn't have a college education, if he had spent 8 years playing football and got all his points busted up and he has arthritis and half of them, I can see him going to work to earn a decent living at the plant, yeah.
But he still shouldn't have to have his body assaulted in that fashion.
Absolutely.
We understand that,
This is so
but-
important, but I think in the next few minutes, Dr. Connet's got to do another interview. But Rusty, I really treasure, your coming and this dialogue beginning even more. I want you to know Lean To is the only environmental organization who's ever filed an OSHA complaint on behalf of workers. It took me 2 days to do it, but by God, I
She did it.
And so we feel real strongly about what you're going through. I mean, I have some disagreements, but we'll make them respectful disagreements at this time. And if we could just, I need to get some things for Dr. Connet. If y'all want to continue the dialogue a little bit longer, but then we need Dr. Connet's wonderful
Okay,
brain
hey,
to get into something